Hello, this is Silas, and I'm back with my friend Steven in the dark. Say what's up to the peoples.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're enjoying this nice spring day.
Yeah, okay. So it's spring in New York City. Steven is currently safe. He's not hiding from the current issue going on in New York right now. We're recording this on the day when there's been an unfortunate shooting in the subway in Brooklyn, so it's kind of far away from where he is. But this is a continuation of the conversation series we have. We do these ones with different books and things like that, and we're listening to what we're talking about. Marry Him, the case we're settling for Mr. Good Enough. Stephen has read this book, so tell us a bit about this book and why we're doing this series.
Sure. So the book is directed to single women. Basically, it's stressing that you should reevaluate your standards. If you're not meeting the right person, the issue may not be that there aren't good guys available, but rather that you're prioritizing a lot of the wrong things and not the right things. And this book is a combination of the author's personal odyssey, but also she interviews marriage experts, matchmakers, behavioral economists, etc. So it's a combination of her personal experience, but also she does talk to people who study this for a living, so they know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and the way we do this series is the conversation that we're having. It's normally things that we're relatively interested in. Sometimes we've discussed these things before, sometimes we haven't. In particular, with this book, Stephen himself has read it, then he just goes through and he's just going to be reading us parts from it, and then we go back and forth in the conversation. But we'd like to include y'all in the conversation as well. Otherwise, why would we just record this? So let us know in the comments whether you're a single woman and single older woman, or you're someone who you think you settled, or if you're a man and you think some of these things are off. Because for us personally, we'd seen some of these things more from like the manosphere type of point of view, looking at current relationships and certain issues. And we've had certain discussions where it's like, okay, we're living in an unprecedented time of just the amount of choice and travel and decision making that you have in actual partnering and the forms of partnering you can have. Whereas in the past, first of all, you were living in very limited areas. So realistically, you'd meet like 100 people around the age of you could actually partner with before you were of partnering age. That's by your 20s, you were actually partnered up. That's how it used to be. And the culture you were living in, there was 2 or 3 ways for you to actually join that kind of partnership. But now you travel around the world, you go through different countries, you go through these apps, you do all these kind of things, and there's a mix. And choice is good. Choice is a positive thing, but there's some paralysis by analysis thing. And I think a lot of people get into the mentality where they think, okay, let me just do this for now because I still know 100 people. Oh, next year I still know 100 new people. Next year I still know 100 new people. But you're changing during this time. So they might be all these people, but there's only one you. So you might be knowing 100 new people, but those 100 people that you knew before also don't know you anymore. So you're kind of also falling out of some of those people that you could probably have partnered up with. So there's many things to consider. And unfortunately for some people, end up being, when we're talking about the women, end up being involuntarily single. I don't
Well,
think there's incels for just from I don't think there's
sorry.
incels for the involuntary celibate is what we've heard for men, right? Where it's like a man wants to find somebody to have intercourse with that they find to meet their standards, and they can't get those people to do that. And I think now you're seeing an increase of involuntary single women who want to find a man who fits their standards of a relationship, and they can't find that sort of person. But yeah, sorry.
So no. What I was just gonna say is, don't feel free to watch and comment just if you're a single woman. If you're a married woman who some of this stuff resonated with you because you put it into practice and you agree with the author or disagree, I'd be curious to hear that. Or if you're like, when I started reading this, I was a single guy, but I thought, okay, how does this apply to me as far as dating and women and all this? And do I have unreasonable expectations? Am I focused on the wrong things? Like, I'd be curious to hear if there's any of those other perspectives as well. Yeah.
That is a good point
Yeah.
because, as we mentioned, we'd seen this from a man's point of view, but this is talking about relationships. I think some of these things, if you just flip the genders, or if you're a lesbian and if you're gay, these things still apply to you. Just
Yeah.
getting to know yourself more and getting to appreciate what you're looking for in relationships. And primarily, I think this is looking for monogamous relationships, so pair bonded. In I think with a one A, one B is to have kids. She particularly Lori Gottlieb, who wrote this, she was I don't think she was never married, but
No.
she ended up was it artificial insemination or was
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
yeah. So she ended up going to artificial insemination and then getting a child, and then she met her partner after that. So that's a you can see even from that you can kind of think like she's speaking from kind of first world country, bigger cities, so, urban sort of area. That's who she is, and this might speak more to them because I think you look at certain smaller town areas, people don't really have too many issues like in developing countries where they still have arranged marriages. Some of these issues don't necessarily apply that much, but these are still things you can relate to. Even if you're in a relationship, I think when you're in that relationship, there's some things that are being discussed in here. We're getting on the fifth part of this series, and there's definitely things that I've seen that, hey, if you're in a relationship, understanding these things and relating to your partner and the people that you've dated, because I'm sure there's people in a relationship thinking, I settled for somebody who's not good enough, so I need to go for somebody else, or the person in the past was better for me. Then you're kind of treating your partner in a way, judging them for a different way. And I think this book, some of these things, kind of make you look at things in a different way and understand that maybe this person is actually somebody who can fit the things you actually want, the things you actually need to achieve to be, I don't want to say comfortable, to be
Satisfied?
fulfilled in life. Yes,
Yeah.
there's satisfied. There's another term that's kind of like satisfied with the C. I'm kind of, I have,
Satiated?
nah,
No, that's with an S, not a C. Yeah.
it might come back to me.
Well,
But
what?
there's this,
Sorry, go
I
ahead. Go
think
ahead.
there's a difference. There's certain things you need to be comfortable, or let's just use comfortable for now. You need to be, to actually get that, the compatibility to get a secure type of stable lifestyle, a settled lifestyle, if to use the word from this, the things you need to have that stability in your life that this person might be getting to you. Now, there might be all these other things you want. I want someone with abs. I want somebody who's seven figures. I want somebody that makes me laugh every single time. I want somebody who finishes my every single sentence that I have. Those are extras that are not necessarily as substantial, I think, as some of the things that are being discussed in this book from what I've seen.
Yeah, and what I was just gonna add too is like I don't know. I think maybe I've had a more realistic view on some of this stuff because the way I see it is, you realize in life with most things that like there's good and bad in everything. Like every workplace I've been in, I've pretty much enjoyed, with one exception or so. But like the other place, most places I've had good experiences and some bad ones. But you kind of get to a point, at least for me, where you realize, okay, if I left this thing, I would be, I might miss certain things, but then I would like this thing more, and then I would be complaining about something different. So it's like people will have nostalgia for where they worked or whatever, who they dated, but then it's like, I know if you go back to the old job, because I've gone back to places I previously worked, you're reminded of all the things that used to annoy you, and then it's just like it's the same thing all over again. And I kind of have a similar attitude here, where it's easy to have that grass is greener mentality, and like also the other side of it, to feel nostalgic about things, but then you also realize that like wherever you are, whoever it is, there's going to be problems, and it's like you can't keep searching for this perfect scenario that doesn't exist.
Mhm.
It's you're just going to end up with nothing ultimately. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and right now we're talking about there's these issues with like groomers and what
Yeah.
kids should be taught about relationships, and
Uh,
oh, we're going to harm people by not talking about this. I think there is just, that's part of the issue that I'm saying, that in current timeline, there's so many different signals out there about this. There's a lot of parents who think it's not even our job anymore, or it's not what the school is going to teach them these things, or they're out there to socialize, and them socializing with other children will make them fun. No, but you actually look at the state of relationships, and it's not looking too good. There's a lot of unhappy people in a time and place where you have a lot of choice, you have a lot of flexibility, you have a lot of options. So why is there so many unhappy people? Whereas in the past, people were like, oh, it's arranged marriages and people were told to do this, they didn't have any choice. And people seem to be content. And that might have been
yeah.
the term I was looking. No, I wasn't looking for content. Okay, so we normally talk more about the intro, about other things when in the earlier series. If you want to go back to part one, was one, I
Yeah.
think we talked for like 30, 45 minutes about just
Yeah.
our thoughts around these topics before. But as we've gotten further in these parts, we just kind of want to get into the actual content. So I'm just going to read what it says here about the book from Amazon.com. And it's something you pick up, 336 pages by Lori Gottlieb, as I said, and it says this: an eye opening, funny, painful, and always truthful in depth examination of modern relationships, and a wake up call for single women about getting real about Mr. Right. You have a fulfilling job, great friends, and the perfect apartment. So, what if you haven't found the one just yet? He'll come along someday, right? But what if he doesn't? Or what if Mr. Right has been, well, Mr. Right in front of you, but you passed him by? Nearing 40 and still single, journalist Lori Gottlieb started to wonder what makes for lasting romantic fulfillment? And are we looking for these qualities when we're dating? Are we too picky about trivial things that don't matter, and not picky enough about the often overlooked things that do? In Marry Him, Gottlieb explores an all too common dilemma: how to reconcile the desire for a happy marriage with a list of must haves and deal breakers so long and complicated that many great guys get misguidedly eliminated. On a quest to find the answer, Gottlieb sets out on her own journey in search of love, discovering wisdom and surprising insights from sociologist and neurobiologist Marshall, Marshall, I keep messing up with this word, Marshall researchers and behavioral economists, as well as single and married men and women of all generations. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So hit us up with the name of this chapter that we're into in part 2, and go ahead.
Sure. So this chapter is called $3,500 for Love. For those who didn't hear the last chapter, again, it would make more sense to listen to that one first because it sort of leads into this. She basically talks about hiring a matchmaker, and that the chapter sort of ends with her explaining, I realized I had to be more proactive in getting someone who could help me find the right partner rather than just hoping they'd show up. So this chapter, she's talking about that. All right. So she talks about how she almost rejected the first guy that Wendy, that's a matchmaker's name, sent her. She hadn't even met the guy yet. She hadn't even seen his picture yet. And from what Wendy told him, he sounded like the kind of person she was looking for. 4 years older than her, as opposed to those speed dating guys who were in their 50s. He had been married before and wanted to be married again. He was a father and loved kids. He was highly educated but down to earth. He collected first edition books and read them. He was financially stable and liked his work. But that what the issues she had is that a year earlier he had been distraught about his divorce. She said recently she had gone out with a string of guys who spent their whole time recapping. So anyway, this guy was taught she had recently gone out with a string of guys who spent the whole time recapping their failed marriages. He had 4 kids, and she was saying if she wanted one, so that would have been 5 kids, and that's 4 of which weren't hers, so that was too much for her. He was an avid sports fan, which was a turnoff for her. He grew up in a place she associated with beer can smashing guys with thick accents, while she was into sophisticated intellectuals, so she wanted to see what else was available. So she listened to the concerns, but wanted Lori to reconsider. A few days went back and forth on email. She assured her that this guy was far from the belching, rough-talking Bronx-born sports nut, but instead was Ivy League educated and corporate lawyer refined. So in response to questions about his hairline, stature, and wit, he replied that he had height, hair, and humor. Wendy didn't mince words. We simply cannot nitpick people to death. Then she says in quotes, he can be from Manhattan, but not the Bronx. He can have 2 kids, but not 4. He can like sports, but not too much. She wrote that my overly analytic mind runs the risk of precision thinking yourself out of a human connection. So she says, I trusted Wendy. She wasn't the pushy used car salesman breed of matchmaker out to take your money and send a match that took the least amount of time and effort on her part. She wasn't an important personal corporate entity that signs anyone up, nor was she the stereotypical, much lampooned middle-aged woman in a muumuu who reads your aura and claims to have a sixth sense about people. She was sharp, hip, happily married, 30-something mom who had remarkable success setting up friends and become by accident a local matchmaker. She didn't advertise. She only took clients referred by people she knew. She had facilitated 6 marriages in the last few years with another couple recently engaged, and she thought this guy and I would match well. Finally, I agreed to meet her match. Accentuate the positive, she wrote, and she sent me his name so I could expect his call. And then Lori's saying, this is when I realized how far off the deep end I had gone. I was disappointed by his name. She says, I know that sounds nuts, but it's a name you'd give to the nerdy sidekick in a movie, a name that would get a kid teased on the playground. It was like in that scene when Harry met Sally, when Sally insists that she had great sex with a guy named Sheldon, and Harry replies, Sheldon? No, I'm sorry, you didn't have great sex with Sheldon, and Sheldon can do your taxes. If you need a root canal, he's your man. But between the sheets, it's not Sheldon's strong suit. So much for being open-minded. Not only had I microanalyzed this guy's background, but I judged something irrelevant as his name. And it gets worse. I took that nerdy name, typed it into Google, found a photo online, thought, his face looks heavy. Let's review here. This guy, whom I'll call Sheldon, sounded interesting, smart, funny, accomplished, kind, loves kids, wants a serious relationship, and I was spending time analyzing his name and whether he might lose 20 pounds. Thankfully, I came to my senses and said nothing to Wendy. By bedtime, I realized he was the most interesting potential date I'd been set up with in a long time, and I felt genuinely excited to meet him. I eagerly awaited his call, which came the next day when I was out. He left a nice message. I called him back and left a message. Then it was the weekend, and I didn't hear from him again. On Tuesday, Wendy had some bad news. Sheldon had called her Monday night. Apparently, in my 6 days of ambivalence about meeting him, he had gone on a few dates with someone else, not through the matchmaker. And by the weekend, things had intensified, and now they were physically involved. He wanted to know where his budding relationship might go before he called someone new. Sheldon was no longer available. Great. When I told female friends the story, they couldn't understand it. Wait, he just met this woman. One friend said, "Why can't he meet you too?" That's an idiotic dating strategy, said another. He's known her a week. How does he know he wouldn't like you better? I tried to feel reassured by my friends' comments, but instead they made me respect Sheldon more. The thought of better, quote unquote, didn't seem to occur to me. He had no so called dating strategy. He was an ethical guy who didn't sleep with one woman and go on a blind date with another. Sheldon's approach to dating was so much saner. The woman analyzing Sheldon probably didn't overanalyze things to death like me either. I doubt she was obsessing over whether he's too into sports and needs to lose a few pounds or is slightly nerdy or has too many kids. Women like me who are perpetually single often do. Relationships are like a game of musical chairs. If you wait too long to take a seat, all the chairs will be taken. And that's pretty much what happened. Wendy tried to find me someone new, but a 41-year-old single mom isn't an easy match. Weeks went by as she explored the possibility of setting me up with a smart, funny, attractive district attorney who was divorced with no kids. But the more she talked to him, the more she realized that he wouldn't be flexible enough with dating around a child's schedule. He simply had no idea what raising a child involved. She asked if I would be open to other religions, and although I have a strong preference for someone Jewish, I found myself saying okay. But the more she talked to another potential match, the more she felt the religion would be an issue for him. She looked around for someone else, but there was nobody she knew in her small network in the 40s divorced with kids category who happened to be available. She would have to go out and search. When I think about the incident now, I like to believe that some of my initial nitpicking with Sheldon had to do with the fact that I paid $500 for 2 dates and $250 per date. With the financial stakes so high, it was reasonable to want to get the best two matches possible. But what did best mean? Wendy had no way of predicting chemistry between Sheldon and me, and he was objectively a match with good potential. If I'm really honest, I think my reluctance to meet Sheldon actually had more to do with something I hadn't admitted to myself. I hadn't come to the terms of being of I hadn't come to terms with the realities of being single and never married at my age. I wasn't ready on some visceral level to let go of the idea of being somebody's first and only spouse, of being somebody's only the one. I wanted a more conventional setup that didn't involve thorny custody schedules, negotiations over where to spend the holidays, and issues with an ex-wife. But what age appropriate single guy with no kids and no ex-wife was going to be interested in taking on a woman who was too old to have kids with him and whose time and energy was devoted mainly to her young child? It seemed that my most promising options were going to be divorced men with kids, and I was going to have to not just accept that, but embrace it. When I overlooked perfectly nice guys in my 20s and 30s, I never sat down and thought about how complicated a calculus middle-aged dating becomes if you factor in a much smaller pool of available men, much smaller pool of available men who interest you, a much smaller pool of available men who are interested in dating someone your age, and the logistical baggage we all carry forward. Now I begin to see all this, but if it wasn't until I let another woman sit in the Sheldon seat and I was left standing alone, then it finally began to sunk in how limited my options are. Even the local matchmaker couldn't find me another date. Okay, that's the end of the first section. What do you?
There's a lot of good things I think in here, and a lot of things we've discussed in the previous parts,
Yeah.
and most definitely, I think the women from that where have all the good men gone, sassy, sophisticated, solvent women can't seem to find men who can measure up. And
Yeah.
one thing they neglected to say in that headline was these sassy, sophisticated, and solvent women. The youngest one was 42. The oldest one was like 57. Being
Yeah.
discussed in this article, it's like that's a big
Yeah.
thing, and that's one thing that I think is good. Why I was saying I appreciate what Lori did here in her making this book is she seems to be very realistic. And here she was saying, okay, this is when she was 40, she already had her kids. So she's already in this journey of trying to understand this. I think she started working this book in her 30s or started collecting information in her 30s. But you see, at this point, she's realizing, and that's the thing, these women in that article seem to be looking for these single men. Like, why are these single men talking about they still want kids? They still, why aren't they, why don't they want me? Oh, I've already been married. I've already had kids. And I was just thinking, why don't you do like that step-by-step show? Why don't people who are divorced, the divorce rate is high, so you're going to find divorced men who are willing to date, and you're going to find divorced women who are willing to date each other, because you're going to have certain familiar things about their personality. And yes, there is that aspect where if you are a man, you have a wider range of people, because let's say you have a man and you're in your 40s, your range of potential partners might be 25 to 50 to 45. Those are the people you're kind of looking for. But a
Yeah.
woman who's 40, that same age, probably looking realistic 35 to like maybe 60. That would be the age range of people who are willing to reciprocate her interest. So that's kind of the thing that's understood. And also, I think men in general seem to take themselves out of the dating market more after having a divorce, after having a relationship that was supposed to be forever and ends. In my experience, and I think we can look at numbers and figure this out, they seem to pull themselves out to the market more. And even from the statistics that we've seen, where they say, oh, there's like seven single women in their 40s for every man in their 40s who's like willing to date in that situation. So I think that's something. What are your thoughts on that point?
Yeah, because that's the thing. It's like, what's the numbers? But then again, it's like, how many of those men, um, like you say, are divorced? How many of those men never had children, decided they want them now at 35 and up? How many men, well, if they have money, they're just going to go for a younger woman. So it's like, as she's getting at, it's like, yeah, these guys may be 40 and up and maybe divorced and maybe good catches, but who's to say they're going to pick you? Because it's like, if they either already have kids and don't want more, if they do want kids, they're going to go for a younger woman, and that puts these women in a tough spot. And it's really sad. Like, I appreciate her speaking out about this, but a lot of these women don't realize it till it's too late. But like,
Mhm.
there's no rewind button where you can go back and say, okay, knowing what I know now, I would have behaved differently. And I think that kind of relates to what you said in a previous video about like, this stuff has to be shared between generations and different age groups, because it's like, that's how you prevent this stuff from happening.
Yeah. And one of the early things she said here was the height, hair, and humor, the three H's there. And that's something that I saw this one meme, where there was some meme of an exchange of some dating app or somebody. This woman asks, like, well, how tall are you? Like, I hope you are over 6'2". The guy's like, yeah, I'm 6'1". It's like, yeah, she's like, yeah, because sometimes like people lie about that. Then he asks, can you tell me how long like your waist measurements? And she says, what? Like why are you asking that? And he's like, if like why does that measurement matter? And he's like, why does my height matter? And she's like, oh well, to be a man you have to be tall, like that's something expected from a man, but a woman can just be anything. And that
I saw
mentality
that.
does
Yeah.
exist out there. I mean, that mentality exists out there. I know this is it might not be the majority of women who think this, but there is that general kind of expectation where these women were also saying, okay, the hair, height, and humor. So height is definitely something that is there. Hair, that's another thing we've discussed with the recent Will Smith slap, people coming out to defend Jada Pinkett Smith. And hair, alopecia is just hair loss. It's most commonly known as male pattern baldness. It's something that men have been dealing with for millennia. It's something
Yeah.
that they're made fun of on a regular basis. That's something that you're judged on, that physical aspect. And then, of course, the humor part, oh, this person should entertain me. But then if you get to a woman and you say, okay, women aren't that funny, there's a reason, because women actually are impressed and attracted to humor. That's part of why the men who, I'm sure there's a genetic aspect to all these kind of things.
Aiden Paladin, if you listen to her stuff, she actually did a video on this. Why aren't women funny? And she got into the
Okay.
psychology of it and stuff. And like, she was showing the different female comedians how like people don't laugh, but then the male comedians are more successful. And she broke it down with like a lot of studies and things explaining why. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. I'll send you that link.
Yeah. Might add that link there. There's a genetic aspect of it, and not just genetic, but I think it's more epigenetic or human behavioral psychology, where there's going to be ways, things kids already see from a young age. The kid who's able to be humorous, not just around women, but even around men, and get the right men around you, and be a leader of men, or be among that kind of socialization, where it's part of our socialization tactic, is to be funny, is to be jovial, is to be
Yeah.
likable in that kind of sense. Whereas you look at some of the things that women seem to talk to each other about, a common thing women do when they're talking to each other, at least something that I've seen, is like somebody does something. I see like an Instagram, and I'll go on an Instagram of a woman doing something. Oh, you look so good. Oh, she looks so young. Oh, there's a lot based off of looks. Even when women are talking to women about women things in women's
Yeah.
spaces, they're not like, oh, that was hilarious. You hardly hear that. But then like guys are like, oh man, like, oh, he really made fun of that guy. Or like, oh, that's hilarious. Or, oh, I can't believe you took that in that kind of way. So there is something that is different in that. If everything was good for the goose, was good for the gander, we'd all be geese. And we're not. We're a sexually dimorphic species. So that's something that's definitely in there. So it's kind of interesting that it's okay to have these things. I'm not saying it's bad to have these things, but if you're going to have the height, hair, and humor, expect the person you're also with to have maybe three things. Now, what would be the three things? Weight. Um,
Well, I'd say
Hair could be a
youth.
thing with. It could also be a thing because it's an indicator of fertility or health or something, right?
Yeah. Well, in general, I was going to say like youth, fertility, beauty. I mean,
Yeah, or
because I was thinking with youth, like I said, I think I meant.
homeliness. Like there's homeliness in that sense of somebody who is who makes you comfortable to just be yourself, who seems they could be a homemaker. That's one thing that is really weird. That it seems that some women seem they don't really seem to understand the appeal of a man finding a woman who seems like she could hold down a home. And
Yeah.
it's hard to really describe what those things are, but there's a level of responsibility, of awareness, just even if it's just something like I think part of the reason of the debts, it's not necessarily just oh I might have to pay for this person, especially if I'm earning more than this person, that makes the debts makes a woman who's indebted less attractive. It's more just like she's spending money outside of her ability. And I think just understanding, okay, this woman has a general knowledge of how to just spend resources and stuff like that. That's something that's appealing. I think, I don't know, there's things in there. I'm not quite sure, even y'all who are listening, what do you think would fit? Like if it's like a height, hair, humor. I think those are definitely three things that most your average woman looks for in a man.
Yeah.
What would be the equivalent of these for a man looking at women? Just let us know in the comments, and even if you
Sure.
can think of any, Stephen.
All right.
And one last thing, I think part of why we go to those things and we start judging things like the names of people and things like this is because I think as we get older, we subconsciously need to try and like make excuses for our
Yeah.
pickiness, and we keep getting more and more picky. Like, yes, I was right to be picky about that. In the
Yeah.
past, when I passed that person over, I passed them over a small thing, and then that
Yeah.
small thing gets reinforced as something worth ending a relationship with somebody. So those small things pile up because I don't think the typical person would really care about something like that. And the last thing is this these women that she went to and talked to about this again the different dating strategies. The spinning plates thing. This is something that in the PUA pickup artistry is something that I just found to be relatively disgusting. I'm like, why are you wasting time doing stuff like this? And the spinning plates is I think it's pretty much when you're dating several people at the
Yeah.
same time, right? Like you have
Yeah, because
like dates set up.
it's after like the circus act where the talented guys can spin multiple plates on multiple fingers, and the idea is that
Mhm.
you're balancing all these different women at once. That's where that comes from. Oh,
And I think and this is in part just due to the dating dynamics, since men propose, women dispose. In this situation, in current dating meta, especially in cities, women spin plates a lot more than men do.
yeah.
Like it takes a lot of effort for a man to be able to spin plates. You have to be very desirable, asking out to 100 people in order to get two or three plates to actually spin. Whereas a woman could just sit back and literally, an average looking woman in New York City can get on a dating app and have a date set up for every day of the next month
Yeah.
in a couple of days. That's an
Yeah.
easy thing for a woman to do. So I don't find it as disgusting or as surprising that certain women, especially I'm assuming single women at this stage, I don't think most happily married women, and maybe even happily married women, might have been spinning plates, and then one of the plates happened to be the keeper. So maybe that's a simple thing. This is something. Yeah, let us know, women. Let us know if you've been when you were dating, or if you are still dating. Are you spinning plates now? If you find that somebody you're dating, a man that you're dating, is like, oh, I'm dating him today, then you call him the next day, and you want to set up something for like 2 days for a week from now, and he says, no, I'm seeing somebody else. How would that make you feel? And have you been someone who have you told the people that you're currently or you were dating that you were seeing several people at the same time, especially in this situation? They found out that he was already physical with somebody. To me, that adds a level of kind of ill. Like once you're physical with somebody, I think you should kind of invest in that relationship for that time being. But that's from my mindset.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to add is I was thinking of the rationalizing stuff, and I was thinking of that friend we have where she said something about like, oh, I'll know someone who will stay with someone even though they only smoke crystal meth once a week or whatever. And I remember reading that, and you and I were like, who do we know that? Like, who do you know that smokes crystal meth? Like, I feel like you read that off of like a forum somewhere or something. Like,
Yeah, and you just get some off the wall kind of examples. You're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm sure that could happen, but
if you said someone who smokes weed every day, like, yeah, I still know a few of those types, but I'm like crystal meth. Like, who do you know that?
yeah,
uh,
actually, who do I? I guess I know some people in like I was living in like the Ohio Valley area, and that was a place that was ravaged by some of these, by the opiate crisis and things
yeah.
like this. So there's some people that might have been involved. I know some people in some other areas too, but then like I don't know. But dating somebody, I don't drink, I don't smoke anymore, I don't drink anymore. I would find it hard to date somebody who's even like a heavy drinker. I don't know, like a crystal meth user, even if it's just like a recreational crystal meth user. I'd be like, probably not. But yeah, I mean, yeah.
So this next section is called "Do as I Say, Not as I Do." So Wendy searched for a new prospect, and Lori wanted to find a way to meet new men, but how? So the matchmaker gave perspective. The greatest advantage, it seemed, how let's sorry, going to a local matchmaker offered the advice and perspective you can't get from online dating. The greatest disadvantage, it seemed, was how few people might have in her personal she might have in her personal network. On the other hand, smaller seem better if you know what the deal is up front. So she truly known that it was, as she truly understood that it was Sheldon or bust, she'd have met him, reservations and all, and just seen how the date went. Instead, I was still stuck in the online dating mentality that if you don't like something about one guy, there's a seemingly infinite number of candidates waiting in the wings. I figured a matchmaking company would be a happy medium, more prospects than a private matchmaker, and more guidance in the wild web. So she got out the phone book and did some searching. So she ruled out agencies that seemed to focus on setting up wealthy men with beautiful women. One was actually called "Beautiful Women, Successful Men," succinctly summing up the longings. Um, as well as those that seemed big and impersonal with offices across the country. I picked Make Me a Match, run by two sisters. I went to their website, filled out a form, name, phone number, gender, how I'd heard of them, waited for someone to contact me. A few hours later, I got a call from one of the sisters, Kathy Moore. She started with a brief sales pitch: 550 weddings, personal service, the experience to know what works. She sounded sharp and professional. She then turned the conversation to me. Tell me about yourself. I explained I was a journalist, 41 years old, never married, a single parent. What did you do? Go to a sperm bank? She interrupted. That seemed a little forward to ask that. She said, yes. She said, good for you. I should have done that. I was like, huh? Turned out this matchmaker was a single 45-year-old who wished she had kids when she was fertile. I wonder how that could be. How could she find husbands for hundreds of people but not be able to find one for herself? You don't have to be sick to be a good doctor, she said, but I didn't buy that explanation. It wasn't an accurate analogy. Moore wasn't a healthy doctor curing sick patients. She was more like a sick doctor who couldn't cure herself of the same disease she specialized in treating, singulitis. It made no sense. When I pointed this out, she said, well, I also don't date my clients. Okay, I thought, fair enough. But why not go online or hire another matchmaker to find one? She seemed to have an answer for everything. People know who I am. I guess, meaning I guess what she does for a living. It's intimidating for guys to date me. The whole situation seemed a bit kooky. Should I ask a lonely heart to find a man for me when she couldn't find one herself? At the same time, I was discovering we aren't the best people to find ourselves a mate, that sometimes we need outside perspective. So I asked what kind of men came to her, what kind of men sign up with a matchmaker. Moore acknowledged that she had far more female than male clients, but she felt she could find me someone. If she doesn't have a man for a female client, she asks other matchmakers for assistance. She scours online dating sites. If anyone seems interesting, she'll meet with him in person to see if he might be a good fit. I like that idea. Screen someone to screen all those candidates, so I don't have to go on an endless array of dates myself. The next step for me was to go and make me a match so that Kathy and her sister could get to know me and what men might be a good fit. It seemed worth a try until she dropped the bomb. I asked about the cost, and she deflected, saying that we could talk details in the meeting. I insisted on knowing up front, and after she hedged for another couple of minutes, she finally relented. For 6 dates in the span of 1 year, the fee was $3,500. I grabbed my calculator and did the math: $583 per date. Their website made it seem like they cater to normal people, not just the super wealthy. 583 is a very expensive date, and she wanted me to pay for 6 of them. I know it's sticker shock, Moore said, but you get what you pay for. You can expect to be here for at least 3 hours when we first meet you. Then every time we send you on a date, we get detailed feedback. We might get it right on the first date, but it might take some work to refine it. You're paying for the personal service. I told her I was interested, but I just couldn't afford it. How about 3 days for $1,000? I asked. I didn't know how the protocol. Could you haggle with matchmakers? It takes too much work to do anything for $1,000. She said it's not worth it for us. I could tell she wanted to move on. Her phone had been ringing repeatedly in the background, and I imagined there was no shortage of female customers more than willing to pay the full fee. You know what I suggest for people like you? She said she spoke in a way that gave me that that way that gave me the impression she'd spoken to quote unquote people like me before. Go on JDate. She was referring to the online site for Jewish singles. I told her I'd already been on JDate, that I'd met my last boyfriend online, but I wanted a matchmaker's help in picking appropriate men. My last boyfriend was smart, sexy, and funny, but when it came to being a husband and father, he was completely wrong. I didn't trust myself to pick men off the internet anymore. I needed guidance. Well, here's what you do. Save your pennies. I don't want you to feel like I'm taking up the last of your life savings, but save up. Don't take a trip or give up that pair of shoes, and put away money for your love life and make your love life a priority. She didn't seem to understand it wasn't about choosing a vacation, which I hadn't taken since a child, or a pair of Manilows, which I'd never owned, and my so-called love life. It was about the reality of what regular people can afford. When I clarified this, she said, we only take financially stable clients. Her definition of financially stable seemed different from mine. I hung up more frustrated than ever. I suspected that if I were a guy, she would lower the fee or waive it entirely, simply to have more eligible men in the database. It didn't add much value to her business. It reminded me of the dowry system, which you need to have a lot of money to marry off your daughter. Could this be the modern American dowry? A woman over 35 needs a lot of money to marry off herself. Here's the thing, although I declined, I didn't rule it out entirely. Instead, I thought of ways of saving up my pennies. I'm sure Kathy Moore knew that's what would happen. She may not think of herself as preying on vulnerable singles willing to go impossible lengths to find a good man, but I'm guessing that a number of women who show up for that initial 3-hour meeting and are shocked by the cost don't leave until they've written a check and signed a contract. I'm also guessing that a woman like me, who says no on the phone, comes back to her eventually, borrowing money from parents, maxing out credit cards, whatever. At what cost? Love. After a week or another year of empty dates, or if they're lucky, a failed relationship, they might come to the conclusion that what Kathy Moore is selling is an exorbitant but priceless hope that they won't end up alone. Okay. Thoughts and comments?
And this becomes more and more. Heart goes out to to Miss Gottlieb and all the women who are dealing with these. Just the first thing I just wanted to think is like the whole matchmaker thing just seems kind of. I mean, yes, we talked about how there was a time when it's like people know it, and that's the thing. If friends, and I think that's why it's better with the person who she's doing it privately. So it's like if she knows somebody who knows somebody, in my experience, if you're really true to yourself and you know somebody who knows somebody who knows someone, you get along with that person that third, because like you only are friends with people who know you as you truly are yourself. So if you get along with this person, that person's probably like that. So if somebody knows them like that in that kind of way, it's a good chance you'll meet with them. So that kind of hookup seems to be more closer to the sort of thing where it's like, okay, a friend of mine suggested this person to me, so that's already somewhere I can say this is in my kind of space. And you can see with that person, she said after a while, she's like, okay, I don't really know anyone else. And that's being realistic. This 3,500, I mean, like we said, this whole solvent measuring up, the idea that women have of looking at the top, and with some of these women, they only see the top earners. They only see the top men. They don't really even factor in other people below that. If if you have the hypergamy type of thing and you're able to afford just paying 3,500 in this kind of sense, chances are you have certain standards of men have to be making at least $200,000 or something like that. Yeah. So that's already going to cut it down. And then now, depending on the cities that you're in, if you go out to certain dates in a New York City kind of place, a couple of dates and things like this, if you're a man paying, it could be $400 a date. Some of these places, if you go to you're going to a movie, you're paying for the Uber, then maybe you get some food, then maybe you go to like another location after that, then you pay for Uber back. You had a couple of drinks at different places. You were just talking about the Dolly Varden, and that was like a good prices for their cocktails, like $18. So if you're going somewhere, you go to a couple of bars, and she's buying a couple of drinks, or you're buying some really top shelf liquors and things like that. I can see a date costing a man in New York City $500. Yeah. So if a man is out there going out a couple of dates a year, even just like a month or something like that, you could be spending a couple of $1,000s a month just dating people. So seeing now women have to spend this kind of money in order to get somebody to just do the kind of things that men normally have to do, which is like go through and ask people and get in contact with people. It's interesting seeing these kind of things switch around. And that's something that I've seen with a lot of these current timeline females and women who are saying we need to have this empowerment, we need to have the ability to break out of our traditional roles, they're rather unwilling to take on the traditional masculine roles. Like the men still have to be the traditional men without the expectations that they had. It's something that I've seen. And what do you think, Stephen? I mean, because for me and what y'all think out there, guys, gals, and everyone else in between who's listening, it's from what you said, it just seems like it's an unethical or immoral sort of thing to charge people for. If you think you're really good at hooking people up in supposedly a happy kind of environment that can lead to like a lot of joy and contentness with somebody, a lot of people will say, oh, there's these big corporations and people like that, or these men who are just hungry for money who take away things, or big farmer type of things. But this is like, this was this big love or big relationship there. I don't know what the term would be, but in my experience, like you said, I think this is something that women would be spending a lot more. I think you'd see 80% of people who go to matchmakers are older women, and that's a lot of how many $1 million industry is something like this, because that's a lot of money.
That's a good question. Well, because that relates to a previous point I made about how there's no advice for young, pretty women on how to pick up guys, because it's like they're getting asked out all the time. With them, it's just they're not, at most it's I'm not getting the ideal guy I want, or the ideal guy I want won't commit to me. I'm just sleeping with him while he's sleeping with other women. So that, like, she's sort of seeing, and I think she said this in the previous chapter, the reverse power curve of, when she was younger, she had all these guys interested in her. Now that she's middle aged and has a child, she has to work harder to sell herself, and her options are limited, just because it's like, how many guys want to take on a middle-aged woman plus a child that's not theirs? And again, it's like divorcees and all that, but it's like a guy even her age with money, I mean, he's going to go for a younger woman. It's either whether he wants a family or just he wants to fool around. It's like why would she be a good option?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tough. I mean, it's a tough situation. But yeah, most definitely, if y'all have had experience with matchmakers, I'm very, very interested. Let us know in the comments. If there's someone that you actually know us, or even if you just want to get to know us, this is a topic that I think would be nice to be interested to just even have, like, if you're willing to have a conversation, to write as long a comment as you want. Just, you might read that on a separate thing. I'm very interested in this whole matchmaking sort of. So if you are a matchmaker, if you know somebody who's a matchmaker, we have a separate series called I Know Great People, where we talk to people who do different things. So I think if you know somebody who's a matchmaker, I'll try to find somebody who's a matchmaker. Or if you know somebody, let us know in the comment section, because I think I have a lot of questions from people who are matchmakers. Okay,
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right, so the next section, it's called Lessons from a Matchmaking Teacher. So
Okay, these might answer some of those questions.
Lisa Clampett owns the Matchmaking Institute in New York. It's the only place in the country that trains and certifies matchmakers. So she called her up, asked her, why is this so expensive? What do these matchmakers know that singles seeking relationships don't? So Clampett, turns out, hadn't always been a matchmaker. She had been a social worker in child protective services at Bellevue Hospital. She enjoyed working with people, but after 13 years of dealing with trauma and illness, she got burned out. Meanwhile, she had some success setting up friends, and one day she was inspired by something she read in the newspaper about matchmakers. She never considered being a professional matchmaker before. In fact, she didn't even know they existed, but loved the idea and thought it would allow her to do the fun elements of social work. So to become a certified matchmaker, here's what you do. You buy a home study kit from Clampett's website, which has everything you need to know about matchmaking, including how to pre-screen a client, interview a client, do coaching, set up the business, and do legal contracts. Legality stuff kind of makes sense to me. Then you take an online test. If you pass, you come to a one-day certification training or do 6 consultation sessions over the phone. After that, you submit a business plan, and voila, you're certified. So for this, I ask clients pay $3,500. What if some stranger took a one-day seminar and know about who I might click with? She said it's not rocket science. Hollywood makes it seem like the hard part is finding the right guy, but the relationship is the hard part. Just this morning, my husband and I had a thing about when he was leaving for work. Single women, she thinks, make the search harder and more angst-ridden than it needs to be. She believes that while beauty matters, women waste far too much time on appearance when their biggest obstacle is actually not being realistic enough when they're younger, and then ending up even more unrealistic later on. A lot of women come to me when they're suddenly realizing they need to do something differently because they're 37 and still single, she explained. So they tell me what they want and think they pay for a matchmaker, they're going to get the men they request in their interview, but that's not reality. Okay, thoughts and comments? Yeah.
Yeah, well, let's answer a few of the questions.
Yeah.
Still, if y'all still know somebody, I
Yeah.
still have a lot more questions, but it might be answered later on in this. But yeah, at least that's good. It's somebody who seems to be realistic on it. I was
Yeah.
just kind of thinking with this as well. Like, yeah, before you can be an obese personal trainer because good information, good data is good data, even if you can't follow it yourself. So that's definitely something that I think shouldn't disqualify somebody, even though that other person seemed to be in her airs a bit, was stuck up a bit, and I'm like, oh, she was like, you're not even worried that you can't do this and that. But then that whole idea where if you're already don't have enough people, you're sniping people from somebody else. So if somebody else already has fewer men, everybody has fewer men, and then you're
Yeah.
already taking those fewer men from those fewer men. There's just so few men in there, and this is just another thing where we're sexually dimorphic species. Some people like different things. Even with these things, the business fields, like there's a lot of small businesses in the United States of America. Majority of the businesses are small to mid-sized small businesses, which is like 1 to 10 people, I think is the figure. It might be higher than that.
Probably.
But I think you'd find these people talk about all this small business ownership of women is and the rise, but I think you'll see a lot of them will be things like this, where it's somebody kind of doing like selling some wares from the house, having like an Etsy page or having a small store, which is still a part of the economy and things like this. But I think a majority of it, or more of them, there'll be more disproportionately. I guess you can't really disproportionately represented when there's like two versions, either male or female. But I think a lot more women, males, females, will be involved in businesses that are more social. Rather, a lot of men will be involved in more like manufacturing, where you're creating products rather than products and services. Okay,
Yeah.
services might be in the middle, but women are more in like the social fields of like life coaching, getting to know people, like I don't say value added. It's a value added thing. I don't know how to describe it, but this just doesn't really seem like a field that too many men will be into. But maybe do you think something like this, maybe like some of the stuff like Jordan Peterson does, or some people in the manosphere who are going more into like the Jack Murphy type of person, where like that kind of thing, where men are coming together to like self improvement and get some sort of training. But does this seem to be something that you think, even if y'all listening, do you think it's something that women would be more into getting into something like this? I don't know.
It's hard to say because I feel like, it's that whole thing of people would say that feminism emerges a backlash against certain things. And I think the problem for a lot of them is that because it's become the dominant ideology, people just go along with it and assume it's right. But then a lot of these women follow that trajectory, the whole like cosmopolitan Sex in the City lifestyle. And then when it doesn't end up the way they expected, they end up miserable. So I think it's like there has to be something like you're describing for women to sort of say like, yeah, you can even, I mean, obviously being libertarian minded, if you want to live like that, you can, but you have to realize there are consequences to that lifestyle and it doesn't end well. And I think in the past, it was more clearly espoused that you're not supposed to do this, or if you do, it's not going to end well. And now it's just, oh, go off, do your thing. But it's like, these women don't end up happy. And I'm hoping that the younger generation learns from personal experience and that hopefully people will pass on some of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, because even outside of what Disney's doing, they're saying, okay, oh, if you think like Cinderella being kissed by a prince is not indoctrination, why would you care if it was like Cinderfella being kissed by a prince? Like, yeah, miss me with that. I'm just more of the thing for me. It's more like the heart will go on type of Titanic thing. That stuff is as much of the fairy tale that, oh, I'm going to be in this, somebody will find me eventually. Eventually, I'll find this love of my life sort of relationship, where that whole fairy tale type of wedding. There's a reason it's a fairy tale. There's
Yeah.
nothing bad with having those kind of stories out there, but I think there's a part more so in developed countries. I've seen this in America a lot more. That American dream type of thing. It goes off into other things that people take things that I think some people are more realistic about, that in America they figure it's not even something that might happen or has a high chance of happening. It's something that they feel entitled to.
Yeah.
Like, I deserve this. This is owed to me. And I'm like, no, 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 it's not. It's not at all.
Sure. All right, so this next section here, it's called "He's a Good Deal, I'll Take It." So Clampett, who's in her 40s, knows this firsthand. She said she wouldn't have met her first husband if she hadn't been realistic. She's like, he's adorable, but oh my God, I'm sweating. No, he was super friendly, relationship oriented, has a PhD, and is a professor. I don't care about money as much as intelligence, so I thought he's a good deal. I take it. Deal is a term Clampett uses a lot, which may seem like an odd way of describing your spouse, but in her view, choosing to spend your life with someone involves deciding which which deal works out best for you, given what you want out of life. Everyone has pros and cons. A lesson she learned from her two very different marriages. Marriage number one was classic. She and her first husband met through friends when they were in their 20s. They both went through grad school, and she thought he was handsome and loyal, a smart guy working in finance, but he didn't have a quote unquote life force. He wasn't feisty. After 2 years of marriage, she left him. Was this the right decision, divorcing a great guy for some intangible life force that she may or may not find in someone else? It's an impossible question. I think if I were more mature, I probably could have made it work. She said it wasn't my priority to have a family then, but now I think I would have. He would have been a wonderful father, and his extended family was fabulous. I didn't know how to respect him. Instead, I said he was boring. But what's better than someone who will be a really loyal life partner? How wonderful to have a really good dad to your kids. You can make having fun a priority in the relationship, but I didn't even try. I was so focused on what might be out there that's better. That's what happens when you're young and don't have life experience. Then that's also what happened, she said, to the women she meets in their late 30s who pass up guys without giving them a chance. Clampett may seem to have gotten the happy ending at 39. She met and married a guy who was feisty and did have a life force, but it was a double-edged sword involving compromises she wouldn't have needed to make in her first marriage. One was giving up having a biological child. She and her husband tried to have kids for years using expensive fertility treatments, no avail, something that likely wouldn't have been an issue 10 years earlier. They're planning to adopt a son. Financially, too, her situation is different in this marriage. A guy in finance makes a lot more than a professor. And then there's the fact that her husband is feisty, which is great most of the time, but other times it feels like a case of be careful what you wish for. My husband's a troublemaker, she said, and I love that about him. But I need to figure out how to communicate with him when he's being a wild man. When we're trying to plan something together, when he forgets to pay the bills, I have to say, "Come on, get with it." That would never have happened in my first marriage. Her point, she said, wasn't to complain about her husband, to say there's no perfect guy out there. There are a lot of guys you can make it work with. And if you don't realize that, you may end up spending your entire life worrying about whether you're settling. A lot of people second guess and assess 100 different things. I'm surrounded by rich guys all the time, and I could go around and thinking, I could have this. My husband could be thinking this too about other women. You both have to think about you both have to think that you got a good deal. And then it says that this is highlighted by the audience. Long-term compatibility is about respect and common values and building something, not about judgment of imperfections. Okay.
Yeah.
Thoughts and comments?
I'm just thinking. Yeah, for those of y'all who don't know, the divorce rate in the United States of America has been going higher, but I think in many cases, some of these is not many cases, but I think like 30% of those divorces will be people who've had multiple divorces. So it's not, if somebody says, oh, like 50% of the marriages break up, like don't work, it doesn't mean out of 100 marriages, out of 100 people getting married, 25 of those marriages will break up. I don't think it's like that. It's more like, if there's 25 men, 25 women, 5 of those men and women will get married several times and get divorced. So it's not, they try to total up that, yeah, this is one thing I like adding to that. But a majority of divorces in the United States of America, I think in the West, most Western European countries, are initiated by women. The highest thing that they say for the divorce is just, I'm not that into it anymore, or lack of like this life force thing. Now, imagine being that man who's been left by somebody who they got along with, as even by this woman said, nothing else was really off. Well, how do you explain life force? What does that do to somebody for the rest of their life? I left you because of your lack of life force. What does that even mean? Like, it seems to be so demeaning to somebody to say that. And then think about, now that man goes forward, just think about how much jaded that person could be in like meeting people forward. I think that's why you see some of these men. And I think that's also part of why these older women, in some situations, you find them to be more looking for people, because they haven't had that sort of breakup. They're just left with like a huge question mark. Like, why am I even bothering in this kind of thing anymore? So there's just something like that to keep in mind.
But like she said, and we talked about in the prior section, it's the grass is greener mentality. Like she was with a rich guy, and now she still sees rich guys, and is like, like a part of you, there's always that instinct that says, oh, if I had this person, I could have these things in life would be better. But then you also have to sort of tame that, because it's like men experience that too. Like, I'm sure men, as their wives get older, they look at these young, pretty women and think like, oh, if I were to get with her, that'd be great. But it's like, what matters more, the loyalty in your relationship, or like just chasing the next cool thing?
Yeah. And one thing I don't really understand about maybe it's because it's just a level of safety or a level of the expectations also thing. I just also maybe because of the schooling indoctrination complex that just does a horrible job of teaching basics of biology. I just don't understand why it's not necessarily nihilism, but there's an apathy to reproduction that happens in the United States of America. Maybe because there's so much access to like birth control, so from such a young age, you already think, oh, if I can stop the ability to have children in the future, I can just continue it. Or people know there's like these treatments. I don't know. It just seems really weird that so few women, with this time when women have access to their own reproductive choices and ability to do so many things, they just seem to not really be aware of the practicalities of just having kids when you can have kids. And there's also a lot of them who just don't seem to want to have kids. And I think that's more connected to just how distant some of their childhoods are and like adverse childhoods. They just like, why should I have a kid just to put them off into like the school and not even spend time with them, or I need to be focused on work? Or as a kid, you're kind of rationalizing, my parents love me, and in order to love me, they had to spend all these hours at the office in order to get this money, the inflation and the different things happening with central banks and fiat currency. So you're thinking, I need to at least make more money than my parents made, so I won't have to work as hard as them to achieve that. Maybe if I'm working more, I'll be able to spend time with my kids. So maybe subconsciously that's in there. But that's I think is fewer people, right? From what you experience, there just seems to be a lot of women who just don't seem to want to have kids, or just really just think somehow they'll be able to just have kids in their 30s and 40s. It's really weird to me. I'm like,
Well,
what's going on?
I mean, Rollo Tomasi and others have talked about a lot about this, how he makes the argument that birth control changed civilization more than the atomic bomb, because he makes the point, he's
Yeah.
like, you drop the nuke, we're all dead, that's it. But the fact that you can make sex accessible, but at the same time limit the chance of having children. So then in turn, what happens in turn is all those biological drives switch on. So that's why you have all these women who are happy to bang the alpha guy because biologically they want that. But at the same
Okay.
time, he sort of plays that field. But then what happens is, because he's running through all these women, and then with a lot of these women, it's, oh, I have access to this guy, this is my standard, I'm not going to settle for
Okay.
less than this. But then what ends up happening is they get older, those guys keep running through them, and then when they get older they have fewer and fewer options. They end up like Lori here. Like, I don't think Lori did that, but I'm like, it's that kind of story. Whereas in the past, and I think even the Victorians talked about this, like, yeah, it's like, I think it was Jane Austen or someone wrote something like,
Okay.
don't go for the pretty boy, don't go for the rake, find the responsible guy. And it was like you had to kind of grit your teeth and be like, okay, yeah, I would love to sleep with the best looking guy, but I'm going to get pregnant and that's going to be a scandal and all this. So it's like, and then of course the whole thing, I was talking yesterday to someone about how the whole having kids out of wedlock, like how frowned upon it was back in the day. Like, women got sent to convents to work. If you ever saw the Magdalene sisters, they would lie and say that the kid was like, the parents had the kid. Like, there was all this, there was just this taboo, but it was also the fact that you could get pregnant, whereas now there's more ways around it. But the biological drives are still there, so I think that's a big part of it, at least from what I can tell. Yeah.
Okay, so the biological drive is still there, where they're still thinking, because the biological drive in all life forms, not just humans, not just mammals, any species that develops with some choice that can move around, that's ambulatory, because it's not really going to be too much of a thing. Like plants, you're not really going to have too much of a choice of what bee brings you pollen. But if you have the ability to choose a tournament species, let's say tournament species that compete for reproduction, I think it is biologically tantamount for any successful genetics to try and achieve reproduction with the most alpha partner they can get.
Yeah.
So, since you still have in this current meta, a lot of women still have access to attention from
Yeah.
alpha males that might not sell. Yeah, this goes back to the involuntarily single, but you're not involuntarily celibate, because some of these are still getting advances and actual intercourse with alpha males. So that is still being satiated. So, okay, so
And
it's just the
social,
fact of, yeah,
I'm sure you've heard this already, but also the whole social media thing about, like, even an average moderately attractive woman will put herself out there and she'll get bombarded, and then you'll have these rich guys say, oh, come out here, I'll fly you out, I'll take care of you, but they don't realize, like, oh, he's just trying to have sex, like he's not
yeah.
interested in a serious long-term thing. And that's why Kevin Samuels, as well as other guys in the manosphere, they always ask, do you have experience with these men dating you seriously or proposing marriage? Because if they're just sleeping with you, you could be one of 5, 10, whatever women. But if they're proposing marriage, it means they're committing to you. They're shutting out other options. Like, I mean, those men do cheat still too. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm saying, like, in principle, the reason if he's proposing marriage, it means he values that woman above all the rest. But if you're just one of 3, 5, whatever women, it's like, you could be replaced anytime.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that definitely does count for some people because like if you're in a smaller town area, even if you were attracted to the most alpha guy, that he's probably going to partner up with an alpha female before you,
Yeah.
the female that might be higher on the desirability chart than
Yeah.
you are. So people being taken out. But if you're in like New York City, there's always newer guys coming in, so it's always there. So even if you're not actually having intercourse with those people, even if you're like, I'm going to focus on my career first, even if you're not dating at all, as you're going through your 20s, you're still getting proposed to. There's still like alpha men asking you, people who you consider alpha, still trying to get at you. So you're still being told by your genes are still like, you're still getting access to this. So you're still there. Then all of a sudden the drop off. Yeah, then that wall that's undefeated happens. Yeah, okay. That kind of,
Yeah.
but it's a sad situation. But like you said, I think we are through a transition period
Yeah.
and we're recalibrating things. And I think having conversations like this, books like this, are part of the recalibration where there's going to be the next generation, Gen Z, and from then on, I think we'll start being more realistic about this. Yes, you can still go out there and ride the cock carousel or spin plates to get to PUA if you want to and all those things, but also understand the quality of people that are doing that is accessible to that are probably lower than average.
Yeah.
And also it has an effect on your actual future ability to pair bond if that's something that you want. But I think it seems to me that the younger folk are becoming at least going to have more access to information and being more realistic again about actual realities of reproduction and just the amazing thing of just having a kid. I think it's a good thing to do.
Because I was talking to 2 people about this. We were talking about some of these rappers as well as athletes that have multiple children with multiple mothers, and I think there was a conversation I was listening to. They were talking about Future is one, and then there's another basketball player. It's like one has 8 baby mamas, one has 9, and like so it's like 8 or 9 kids with 8 or 9 different mothers. And I was saying, like, I'm not defending their behavior, but at the same time, it's like if you're woman like 7 or 8 and you think like he's gonna commit to you after all, like you're an idiot, honestly. Like, because I think what happens with a lot of these women is he fools around with all these other women, gets them pregnant, and then like pays child support, but then goes off and does his own thing, and then a new one comes along and thinks like, oh yeah, he's gonna commit to me, he's gonna marry me, I'm special, I'm different, but it's like it's just the same thing over and over, and it's like if you were woman number 2 or 3, okay, I'd have some sympathy. But after that many, it's like, come on. It's like, it's the same reason you don't hire people who've had, you know, all these jobs. Like, like that guy from Harvard I talked about in my interview on Great People I Know, like the guy had like 10 jobs in 2 years or something. It's like, you don't hire people like that because it's like either they're going to bail on you or they're just incompetent and they get fired over and over. So
Mhm.
either way, like if you had like 1 or 2 short-term relationships like in the mix, fine. But if it's like this revolving door, I mean, that's a pretty big red flag.
Yeah. And with that, I think one thing that for both of us, we personally we prefer monogamous relationships, and that's
Yeah.
something that Stephen is currently in right now. He
Hmm.
seems to be going well. Something that I'm hoping to soon hear once I start becoming more productive and more of a desirable kind of partner, showing enough more signals where somebody I would actually be like, yeah, okay, I can see. I trust your interest in me. Whereas right now I'm like, yeah, I'd be kind of suspect if somebody was that interested. But getting in those situations, but doesn't mean that these other forms of partnering are bad. If somebody like Future is like, or if you can afford to pay for those children, and a woman understands that we are in this kind of harem type of situation, and they don't all of a sudden get pissed off and start suing you if you're like with all these other people, do that. But I think the thing is just the knowledge, the choice. Just know yourself, know what you want, get into that situation. If the person changes from what you told them to begin with, that's something different. But if that person remains the person you actually met, don't all of a sudden get salty when things change. But I think in the future you'll start seeing more of an openness to like these different kind of forms of partners and relationships, which might still work. But I think that would be still a minority. I don't really imagine. I can maybe probably see like more like a torn like a a serial monogamy type of thing happening, where
Yeah.
you could like renew your marriage vows like every 5 years or something. Like you sign a contract where you're like, okay, we're getting together, we're having one kid until our kid is like 10. Then at that point, we like think about the things again, or we bring something. So I think there's going to be more flexibility to the typical marriage contract. But from what we've known historically, a monogamous pair bonded relationship with a strong support system of friends and relatives is the healthiest environment to raise children in. That's something that is, if children is a key, that's known. Like there's really not too many arguments against
No.
that right now. All right.
No. All right, next section is called the tap water incident. So Clampett sees this kind of judgment all the time. Take what's called the tap water incident. I introduced this woman to the nicest guy, and they went out, and he didn't order bottled water. He said tap was fine. The woman reports back to me after the date and says he ordered tap water. He took the subway to meet me. He didn't even take a cab at night. He's cheap. In fact, he was tall, handsome, and wealthy. So I said he may not care about bottled water or cabs, but if that's important, maybe he'd understand that. You'd figure out a budget together. These are the things you can discuss if you ended up liking each other. At least go out with him again. But it rubbed her the wrong way. She wasn't into it. I said that I'd be happy to meet Mr. Tapwater, but Clampett had already set him up with someone else, and they were excited about each other. The woman who thought he was cheap, she pointed out, was still available. Clampett matches people like this. Number one, she said, I look at whether the two people have common relationship goals. Number two, I look at values, things like independence, family, religion, loyalty. Number three, what are the key qualities this person needs? You get no more than five. Things like he has to be very intelligent. Number four, I look at shared interests. Interests are great because it's bonding and stimulating and fun to share those, but the other things are more important for the long term. I put shared interests last for that reason. I told Clampett that I'd always put shared interests first, not ultimately, of course, but that I'd become attracted to men initially because of our shared interests. And she said, well, how has that worked out for you? So I tried to imagine what it would be like to marry a guy who was smart, funny, loyal, mature, and family oriented, but who had completely different interests from mine. What if, say, he was into video games and classic cars, and I'm into literature and hiking? What if we had no shared interests at all? Then again, many of my closest friends have completely different hobbies or don't like the same movies and books, and we never run out of things to talk about. Two smart, funny people who come from similar backgrounds and want similar things often discover they have some shared interests. And if you have an interest being married and raising your family together, I don't think the video games or hiking would be an issue. Suddenly, then I realized I'd overlooked the two most important and basic interests a prospective spouse would need to share with me: family life and raising children. I knew those were important, but my interest list had been full of the superficial things you'd find on a Facebook page. I asked Clampett what kind of guy she'd pick for me. What was, realistic? She said she'd pick someone who's maybe not the most gorgeous guy, someone who's older, shorter, and with kids. And she said, you're more of a challenge for matchmakers, but you're matchable. How's that for a dose of realism? Clampett could hear my disappointment and my gaping silence through the phone line. Look, I'll say the same thing to you that I say to younger women who don't want to hear this, but I say, if you keep doing what you're doing, who's going to change? You don't want to be 30 and the next day you're 45 and thinking, what have I done with my days? Because as you know, it gets harder. I did know, but I still had trouble with short, older, with kids and not gorgeous. Not because I think I'm so fabulous. After all, I'm also shorter, older, with a kid and not gorgeous, but because it's hard as a woman not to have it drilled into you, the notion that no matter how objectively ordinary you may be, somehow you deserve to be with the creme de la creme of male companionship. Read any article uh, on dating on a woman-oriented website and in women's magazines, or check out advice books marketed to single women, and you'll read things like, you deserve to be with a man who pays, you deserve to be with a man who always puts you first, you deserve to be with a man who rubs your feet at night, and of course the man in question will also be tall, dark, and handsome. Do men get this kind of advice? You deserve to be with a supermodel. You deserve to get blowjobs every day. You deserve to be with a woman who will fly you around the country and go to football games with you. Not as much. But for women, it seems that quote unquote desire has become the new quote unquote deserve, which is why, even though there's nothing wrong with shorter, older, and with kids, I thought I deserve something better. Okay. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, like I promise I haven't read this book already, because it seems like I say something and it's like the next kind of section. It's actually the part that
Yeah.
Stephen actually reads out that she said also in the book. And this is not even her saying. This is the person who's running the matchmaking institute, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I think one thing with here is, yeah, if you don't have things in common, you can find new things to get together. That could be something good. Where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
you have your hobbies, and you say, okay, we got a little extra time to do something. Let's go discover a new hobby together, and that be like the hobby that y'all started together. As long as you have the kind of the same general capacity for things, just showing that you have hobbies for something. If it's like a hobby, you might have a hobby of watching something. Somebody might be like watching American Idol and they're really familiar with that. Somebody like, I'm watching this sports. That is still watching people doing something competitive. So you already like spectating at people doing something. So go find some other kind of spectator thing, maybe like in person in the area instead of watching something remotely. And you find like, oh, you might be living in a town where there's like maybe a lacrosse team, and maybe both of you went to schools that had lacrosse and you never actually played it, but you decide, well, let's go just watch the lacrosse game, local lacrosse team, and then that could be a thing that you all do together because you're already shown that a hobby of yours is watching competitive things. I think that's going to be something in mind to actually think of rather than like, I already do this, so these are the only things I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So I better find somebody who does these same things as well. That could be something that I kind of think of doing. Yeah, and
And I think of that with my own parents too, because I don't know if I've said it in here before, but I made the point how politically they're opposites. Like my dad is a left-leaning Democrat, my mom's a conservative Republican, but I've noticed a lot of the differences with them are more tribal. Like they go along with the parties because it's just like how they vote or whatever. But the underlying values are very similar. Like both Christians, both family-oriented, both traditional. I don't even think their interests are really that similar. I mean, they watch different shows and things, but there are certain things they bond over. Like they're both into gardening, they're both into cooking, things like that. So I think, and I think my parents, like some of the older generation, they had a more realistic view of you don't have to find someone you click with 100% on everything, but it's like the overall values, the life goals are the same. Then, okay, we share some interests. And then, you find friends outside of them who, you can indulge the other interests with. So, like, for example, like, Christine and I are both like into cooking. We're both into gardening as well. But it's like, I'm not going to talk to her about video games or like, some of this stuff because it's just we don't have that in common. Yeah. Yeah.
maybe like Farmville or
Yeah.
something. I don't know. All right, the last thing I'd like to ask you all out there, guys, gals, and everybody else in between, what is the most trivial or superficial thing that you've either stopped liking somebody or stopped dating somebody for, or been told that you were was a deal breaker? Because that tap water thing is so minor. They said it was the tap water, the using the subway. And what was the third thing? But I think
Oh,
yeah,
he didn't call a cab. That's what it was. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, using so what? Like I like walking places. Yes, you're saving money as well, but I'm also like I like getting some exercise in. It's like currently I'm not really dieting that well, so I try to make sure I'm like walking like an hour a day or 2 hours some days and things like that. Like on the days when I fast, I like I'm walk like 2 hours. So there's other things I work around there. Yes, you're saving money. I'm also listening to audiobooks. I'm thinking during that time because when I'm at home, I'm spending a lot of time on the computer, so that also gets me off the computer for at least a couple of hours a day. So there could be many other things going into why he's doing that. With tap water, I don't buy bottled water. There's some things with the bottled water also I don't know if you all know, depending on how the actual, if you it's in the plastic things, like it's being shipped, it cools, it warms, it cools. Like some of the plastic can like leach into the water,
Yeah.
so some of the quality of that water might not be. A lot of these water people, they also just like distill water, like Dasani is just tap water, but it's like distilled. So some people might be thinking you're getting something different. I just boil my water and I have it in these like glass jugs. Sometimes you can see me drinking. So I drink like two of these a day, like around that. So it's just kind of a thing that people just do these things, and these are such minor things. But as we mentioned before, I think as you get older, you start reinforcing your decision to not have accepted somebody in the past, because most of us have people in the past that we thought of that could have been something, that might have been something, and for various reasons it never actually worked. So I think you keep saying, I think you keep reinforcing that these minute type of things are actually worth actually making these life decisions off of. And some of them are so trivial and superficial. So I'll be interested to know which ones you've done yourselves and which ones have been done to you. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because you just made me think. Like my mom talked about, like we'd always make fun of the way my father dressed, and she's like, "No, he's come a long way." She's like, "When I met him, he dressed horribly." And the thing is, her female friends actually gave her a time, like, "How do you date a man who dresses like that?" But she was wise enough to see, like, okay, in the grander scheme of things, this isn't some deal breaker. Like we laugh about it, and his style has improved too. But it's like, but his, I mean, you figure his father. It's funny because in his family, like the women dress well, but the men don't. So I think it's just because they're like a lot of them were blue collar workers. They didn't have much money, so they just wore like what they had to. Um, but it's like he's improved, and like mom says, it's like it's not going to make a difference on whether the relationship worked or not. So it's like, yeah.
Yeah. It's not too superficial. It's an accessory. It might be artificial, but it's
Yeah.
not superficial, I would say, like dressing. Yeah, okay.
All right, so the next section is called the fussy factor. She's crippled as far as I'm concerned, said Julie Furman, the founder of Cupid's Coach, one of the most popular Los Angeles matchmaking companies, about a potential client who had come to see her that morning. I won't take on anyone who will be too picky. I was asking Furman to give me the lowdown on women like that who have trouble dating guys that aren't our type. No matter what I said, this woman would find something negative. Furman continued. I'd bring up gentlemen for her to study, and she'd say he's not right because of this or that. She was, how shall we say, unreasonable. Furman, who had been both married and matchmaking for 2 decades, is the antithesis of the Los Angeles stereotype. She's old school, unfailingly gracious, a middle aged woman from the Midwest who uses words like gentleman instead of guys and euphemisms like unreasonable for unrealistic. She says with a straight face, "We're here to help people, not miss out because of the fussy factor." Like Lisa Clampett from the Matchmaking Institute, Furman is the first to admit that her husband wasn't initially her idea of Mr. Right. Not that she wasn't looking for him. Nearing 30 and established in her career in the hotel business in St. Louis, she had her share of blind dates but was burned out. She had signed up with a grading service called Great Expectations and met the man who became her husband and the father of her 2 sons. Gil was her matchmaker and he became her match. If this sounds like a fairy tale, Furman is quick to give a reality check. "I made some compromises," she told me. "He's 14 years older than me and Jewish. I was raised Catholic. He had a scruffy beard that I hated, and he wore cheesy looking clothes." It's funny, just as I was saying. My mother always said, you'll know you found someone when you respect each other and you're really comfortable with him." I never listened to her. Then I met Gil, and I didn't really have the hots for him at all, but I got a really wonderful sense of him from being his client. So much that while Gil showed her perspective matches, she wondered why he wasn't asking her out. One day she laid it out there. She asked him why she didn't see him in the client book. He said, "I don't want to ask out my members." So Furman said, "What if a member asks you out?" That led to drinks and a long entertaining conversation at a nearby bar. But their second date didn't go as well. It was flat. I thought, no, he's still not the one. Still, she went on the third date, which was comfortable, but no sparks. It might have ended there. But then Furman went out of town for a week, and then she and Gil talked on the phone each night and became friends. It was then that Furman started to feel the butterflies. Furman said that at that point, she had 5 most important criteria on her list of what she wanted in a marriage: someone family oriented who wants kids, someone who respects her and whom she respects, someone who has her back, someone Catholic, someone who shared her interest in personal growth. She compromised on issues 4 and 5. "I was willing to be flexible about religion, so our kids grew up Jewish. And if Gil wasn't willing to travel around the country to see various gurus speak, Furman is willing to suspend her travel and explore her interests locally through yoga and meditation with a more manageable schedule." What about physical attraction? After all, Furman hadn't painted a very appealing portrait of Gil with his bad beard and cheesy clothes. Furman said she took immediate physical chemistry off her list when she realized that given a certain level of attraction, she could find someone very attractive over time. "That difficult woman that I met this morning, she rarely falls in love over time. It occurred to me that Furman would probably find me, quote unquote, difficult too for the same reason." Furman says she had another client who was 5'10" and would not date short, bald men or men who weren't Protestant. She rejected most of the men Furman tried to match her with until Furman ran out of acceptable prospects. Then the woman moved to D.C. and fell in love with a man at work who was 5'8", bald, and not Protestant. She married him. He wasn't what she was looking for on paper, but what she was looking for in real life. Okay. Thoughts and comments? Yep.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it sounds like a good one. Now we were just talking about how there's different. So this was like a man involved in it. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting to see that. And we've talked about this before, where having standards is good. If you know yourself, you know what you want. You have certain limitations and certain things that are also in there. So, and that's a good thing. Like have like 5 things. It could be maybe like 3 of those things are like 2 of those things are must-haves. One of them is like, okay, I can throw this away completely, where it's just like I'm adding this as just some icing. And then 2 of those things can just be things that are flexible. And then if you have those 5, expect the people you're with to also have like their 5 at all. So it's kind of good to see somebody who is relatively flexible with it. And also the age gap was there, and she decided. And this is also part of what you're talking about with with some of those older women talking about, oh, like where have all the good men gone who measure up. I think those women in that article that we read would not think Gil would measure up. Yeah. So while they're like pursuing the top 10 percenters while they're in their 40s, while they're in the low 40s and things like that, or late 30s, low 40s, these people like Gil are still just living their life. Like Gil might not have been actively even dating, but the younger women are still competing for those men and actually going out there and reaching out to them. So while these women are still with the 10% of a much smaller of older pool, these younger women are still just looking at all this wider range. So these people are being pulled away. So by the time the women get to like 45 and like, okay, I'm not going to go for the top 10% guy anymore. These other guys who might have been more average have been picked off by some younger women or some other people in this situation. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was interesting the compromise on religion because I mean, my father's a Congregationalist, but not super religious. My mother's Catholic, but definitely more religious. So we were raised Catholic. So I've thought about like those type of scenarios in my head. I mean, I think it also just depends on how important the religion is to the person. Because like my dad, he went to Sunday school and stuff, but he grew up kind of having a lukewarm view of it. So he wasn't super committed. So he just kind of like let my mother do it. But then I know other people like, kind of like her who are religious and Jewish, like they want to raise their kids that way because they see it. It's like it's not just their religion, it's also their bloodline, their lifestyle, all that. So I kind of have mixed feelings on this. I think it depends on how important it is to you. But again, if it's that important to you, I guess you just have to find someone who feels the same way or will let you take the reins. Because I mean, if you put if you put like my mother could not have married a Jewish guy because it's like she's too devout for her faith. It would have been too much conflict.
Yeah, for me, like I'm a pantheist, where it's like I don't. It's not even that. It to me, it's actually. I think it's actually almost unattractive if somebody considers any theism to be. To me, it's too irrational, and maybe it's because I've moved around a lot. There's various reasons where there's a lot of things where I'm constantly trying to find the understanding of things. Where like if there's a question mark to something, I'll just kind of keep asking why do you believe that? Why is that based? If this is it, is it going to be the same in the future? Maybe I think a stronger, because I've had a childhood that had a lot of things changing. I think in the future, I'm looking for some kind of stability that might be also irrational. It might be taking this too far. But I just think the irrationality and lack of consistency that theism has is something that is actually relatively unattractive to me. And most of my decent friends are not devout. This I know a lot of people who are believers, but they're not like strong devout believers quoting God or saying that this is because if someone's at that level, it's to me that's if I had those five, that would be one of them. Where I'm like, nah. And for sure, I can't imagine raising my kid into anything where I wouldn't be able to keep answering the whys until a point where I'm like, I don't know. Whereas with theists, I think they get to a point where they say, I know because this other thing told me so, and that's not something I'd want to teach my children at all. So for me, that's yeah, as you said, for me that's hard to imagine.
I think it's almost like
compromising.
you and I have talked about like if you would date someone who smokes weed or drink, and like for you, you're completely straight edge, so for you, not at all. Now the thing with me is I don't smoke weed. I drink a little. I drink a little bit. I've been cutting back. Like I was drinking every day before. Now I try to take 2, 3 days off in a row and then have fewer servings. So I don't have a problem being with someone who drinks because of that. But at the same time, it's like if they have to get drunk every night, that's yeah, red flag definitely. Yeah.
I think with the drinking and the smoking, since I have done it in the past, and even if I haven't done it, there's some
Yeah.
drugs I haven't done. Like if someone's like on ayahuasca, like has done that, I'm like, okay, it's just how much is it in their life? I think if something is not like directly, like if it's an addiction,
Yeah.
it's different than if it's something that they do occasionally. But if something that they do a lot and is part of their socialization, since it's not a socialization I would participate in, it'd just be kind of tough for me to get into that. And I think another good thing was just like the whole idea, like just like the attractiveness. There was this song that what was it? Ray Shrumman or something like that. I ain't got no type. I don't know if you heard that song.
I
Like
don't think so.
the bad bitches is the only thing I like, and they're just talking about with like other things where like, and I think there is stuff like that with the younger generations also because you're just living in places where you're seeing women of different size, shapes, looks, and things like that. So physical type is something that I think is reducing the amount of importance, yet there's still a level of fitness, there's a level of health, there's a level of youth, of fertility that is still positive and can be displayed in many different ways, especially when you're looking for just the basic biology of reproduction. But when it comes to that, if it's important to you to have kids, the ability for somebody to have kids or have sperm that has kids is going to be a key thing that you look for. But the body that comes into is not as important as it is to some people who make it seem to be like, oh, we have to look good together in this that kind of idea. I think is something that is a little more. It goes more to that fairy tale type of thing. Whereas in my experience, I think in your experience, when you meet somebody and you get to know them, it's like they're a bad bitch because like their actual personality is really good. you get to know like this is the container of this personality, and that container becomes more and more attractive as you value what's contained in that.
Yeah.
Whereas I've seen people who are just like bloody attractive, and then you hear them talk, and just like it's just destruction. It was like that happens a lot. Yeah.
And you'll notice too, like these last two matchmakers, this is a common theme in this book. They talk about a lot of couples that when they first met, they weren't blown away by each other, but as they got to know each other, they found, oh, we have this and this in common, and then they ultimately realized, hey, we should be together. But it wasn't sparks and magic right away.
Yeah, that whole love at first sight thing is something that I don't put too much. I don't put there's lust at first sight, but I
Yeah,
don't think
exactly.
there's any such a thing as love at first sight. Because in my estimation, Stefan Molyneux still has the best definition of love that I've heard so far, where love is an involuntary reaction to virtue when you're virtuous yourself. So I think that takes a level of knowing and understanding that this person does X, Y, Z, and then you start getting that kind of attraction to that person. But if it's just physical, that's more lust.
Sure. So there's two sections left. One is pretty small, so I'll just,
Okay.
All right. So when this is called Wanted 30-year-old single women. So when you sign up for Furman services, which start at $2,900 for 3 introductions at 3 months and can go up to $15,000, she'll get to know you, resume, personal interview photos, and she'll pull up her top 5 candidates. She's quick to emphasize the for you part. She bases this assessment on who you are, who you're hoping to meet, who's available, and here's the key: who she thinks you have a shot at. She allows clients to search her database for potential matches as well, but only she can arrange a date. You may look through the database and think Neil is a great guy. He's your it guy, referring to a popular male prospect, but I know who he's going for and it's not you, so I don't put you two together. Neil, who is 42, is going for younger women, but Furman doesn't have many female clients in their early 30s. And when she does, it's usually a mother signing up her daughter, like a 33-year-old physician who keeps saying no to the people Furman wants her to be. She says she's too busy or this guy isn't tall enough. The 30-year-olds want to find someone, but they're still picky, picky, picky because they think it will just somehow happen. She says she wants to get married. She wants to have children. Well, she doesn't realize that if she wants to have children, she better get with the program. Most women who come to Furman when they're nearing 40. The majority of their clients tend to be in their 40s and 50s. Women in their 40s are especially tough because they have histories by then, either lots of ex-boyfriends or a few long-term relationships, and she has to wonder why. Are they always looking for what's wrong with people instead of what's right? These are the women Furman wishes had come to her when they were 29. That's the age my mother married my dad, by the way. Furman tells women of all ages to pay attention to the men who are already attracted to them instead of walking in a room and hoping to find the most attractive man. The men who are responding to you, those are the ones you want to nurture, and those are the ones women will often dismiss. She told me about another client who is 38 years old and wants someone tall, successful, and who has hair. Everyone Furman presented came up lacking. I said, okay, you can have tall and successful, but give me a break on the hair thing. Likewise, if education is a client's top criterion, that's fine as long as she won't nix a guy because of the way he dresses. This often gets met with resistance. Sometimes they have to get to the point of exasperation or sorrow before they'll be even slightly flexible. A woman called this morning who was 47 years old, and she was as picky and fussy as that woman who came today at 37. The window of opportunity is going to change drastically for this woman at 50, just like for those at 37, for those 37, for the 37-year-old at 40. To these ladies, I say, are you willing to have that again? And if you say yes, they'll have a much better chance of finding the man they'll want to marry. And if they say no, I can't really help them. While some matchmakers talk about romance, Furman doesn't even like to use the word. To her, romance is about the evolving relationship as it has been in her own marriage. The most exciting aspect of her marriage has been learning how someone can surprise you. A guy may not seem exciting on the surface, but he might have something to offer exciting over the long term. Interesting ways of looking at the world, the ability to make you laugh after a long day at work, a sweet way of challenging you to become the best version of yourself, being a wonderful dad. He just doesn't look the way he did in your daydreams. Women come into the office and say, I'm not going to settle, Furman says. And I say, I'm not asking you to settle. I'm asking you to broaden your fantasies. And then there's just one small section. It's one page, so I'll just read that now. It's called A Personal Trainer for Love. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about Furman's and Clampett's husbands. They sounded like guys I wouldn't consider if a matchmaker presented them to me, but they make both these women happy. So when these matchmakers ask their clients to consider the guy who is to this or not enough that, they're simply asking something simple. You can have rigid expectations and try to find someone who meets them, or you can let go of preconceived notions and find someone you'll fall in love with. After the Sheldon incident, I felt like I needed more than a matchmaker. I needed to enlist the services of Evan Mark Katz, a well-known dating coach who likens himself to a personal trainer for love. My learning curve was going to be a lot steeper than I expected. Not only could he give the guy's perspective on how to do things right, but if he could set me straight, I knew it would be Evan. And then the next few chapters are about her sessions with him. Okay. Thoughts and comments? Yep.
Oh. Yeah, I think with the section you said before that is, I think for that one, I'd suggest y'all. I mean, it's an hour and a half for that one. You've already been with us for an hour and a half, and thank y'all very much for those who've been along with us on this. But I think we've already talked about that in extent. I think the things are being mentioned there in the reading of the article of the sassy, sophisticated, and solvent women in their 40s and 50s. Those are the women who seem to be talking about those kind of things, and we gave our thoughts on that. It's just, be more realistic. What are you looking for in this? If reproduction is not a thing anymore, having kids is not a thing, or just be more realistic about that, and you can find somebody. No matter no matter your age, as a woman, you'll find people, probably most of them, willing to actually propose or do something, but that person, it's on you to see if somebody will fit. But then, of course, you get to some points where some people are in certain areas where the men seriously just dry up. They're just not there anymore, and that happens really fast. It's not a thing where it's like a slow thing. It's just all of a sudden like you hit some kind of thing, and then for some reason, just the potential just kind of go away. So if you're actually this is even stranger. Like if somebody has thought enough, they already have tried in the market already and haven't found somebody. They're paying money to somebody else who's supposedly an expert on this, and they're still saying, I have to be exactly like I was when I was in the market. And it's like, can't you all see what's going on? And then lastly, like, go mom out there trying to get them grandkids going by signing up their daughters. And that's kind of nice of the mothers. Yeah.
Well, I think it was in the previous chapter too. The issue is that a lot of them, they have the same standards at 30, late 30s and beyond that they had when they were 20 something. And it's like, you don't realize men don't want the same things, and you have to adjust your standards. And again, that's why I always say I hate the use of the term settling, because it's like settling, I think Samuels has said this too. Like settling is like if you're an average woman and you settle for a below average guy, like if you have a decent career, take care of your health, and you get with a guy who's like living at home and making minimum wage or something, yeah, that's settling. But if you are an average woman and you get with a guy who makes median income and things go well, I mean, that's success. That's not settling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's just the term of settle. If like when you settle on a house, you're looking for these different houses and you settle on it. You're looking through a menu of like different things and you settle on a dish.
Yeah.
Like you're looking through Netflix and you settle on a new show to watch. Those are not negative things when you settle for that. You've looked through options and you settle on a choice. And I think that's how this whole settling term should be rethought of. And I think that's the way that Lori Gottlieb seems to be at least working towards building up. Where it starts, of course, it's just, I can't believe I settled. But that's what she's saying, the case for settling. She's not saying, oh, you don't have to settle by doing this. No, she's saying, no, settling is actually, can mean different things, and it's actually not a negative sort of term. And I think that's a good thing that she does here. Well, so
with settling, you made me think of like growing up and like when like we'd have to make a decision on like a movie or dish or something, and my mom would get annoyed and be like, can you just settle on a decision? And it's like it's the same sort of thing of like, you're not going to be like, oh, I'm not going to date 30 people and be like, is this one better? Is this one better? Is this one? No, at some point it's like, you're getting older, the clock is ticking.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see. Like, let's see what she gets into the future ones. Like as we mentioned, there's different levels. I guess now there's like the Super Sensei XYZ, like double triple OG, and like the dating thing, the dating personal trainer type of thing. So I'm excited to see what's going to come forward with those sessions. But yeah, that's a lot of time and money she's invested in. Yeah, for some women, many women, she wasn't willing to just drop down the 3,000. It was the 3,500 for like the 5 dates.
Yeah.
So she wasn't willing to do that, and I think that's in part also because of the person that was doing it. Maybe if that person had shown that she was happily married and had a couple of kids, or she was somebody who had been in a similar situation where she had a kid of her own and then met somebody after, maybe by living that, because of course you can be an obese personal trainer, like they talked about this love personal trainer person. You can be an obese personal trainer. You can, for those who believe, somebody can be there's atheist preachers who still go out there. They don't believe what they're talking about, but they know the actual subject matter. They can, if you're a believer, they can give you verses and precedent in whichever belief system that you have that apply to your personal situation without them personally believing that.
Yeah.
But I think if you knew that that person was an atheist, chances are you would pick a church where somebody was a believer, even if they weren't as proficient in knowing the content, because there's an aspect in there. So I do think there's a different part in there that you can see with these other people. But it seems like the people who actually had relationships seem to be providing a more realistic product
Yeah.
in the whole matchmaking environment. So I'm still also interested for any of y'all out there who've been to matchmaking, who are matchmakers, who know matchmakers, let us know in the comment sections. I don't know. What, you got anything else to say?
Well, I was just going to add, I liked her point in the last chapter about being proactive, because the whole idea of, like, her analogy of, you don't just, you want a job, you don't just like wander around offices, you want a house, you don't wander around neighborhoods. So I think there is something in taking a proactive approach, but at the same time, it doesn't mean everyone is going to give good advice either. So I think that's why, she and others, it's good that they talk to multiple people and sort of compare and see, okay, what's worked, what hasn't, all that. Yeah.
This could be, there could be an opening market in here to start actually marketing this matchmaking thing to younger women, to women in their 20s, professional women in their 20s in cities, instead of just doing the Twitter, or not the Tinder or Plenty of Fish type of thing. Just start actual matchmakers where they're actually getting more information.
Sure.
Especially if you're a young professional, you have little time. That's part of why people just swipe because they don't have the time. But then pay somebody. You're normally earning. Young professional women in their 20s actually earn more than men in a lot of fields, a lot of office type of jobs, white collar jobs. So instead of that, already start getting in touch with matchmakers. This is my suggestion. Even if you're younger, even if you're in a situation where you don't necessarily feel you're ready to get married, I think look around where you are and try to consider actual matchmaking, which seems to be more. And because the thing I was talking about before, just from earlier, I was like, this seems kind of, is it ethical? Is it moral? But I think it's because of the way that person was talking about it. But then now, I don't know. I don't know what my future has in store for me. I'm getting towards 40 now, and I'm thinking like, yeah, maybe matchmaking might be something I get into the future. I can't see myself actually going into it. But yeah, it's an option. So it's something I think some younger women should consider.
It's hard to say because you don't know how life will pan out. Because I mean, my parents met because they lived in the same apartment complex. They just happened to strike up a conversation. So you hear those stories, but then there's other people who I know who work a lot, or they have certain jobs, and they say it's hard to meet people because of that. So that's why they do this sort of thing, because it's like you don't want to date people where you work, and it's like, are you just hoping to talk to the right person on the street? Like, it's kind of,
Yeah, I think for me, that's one thing I'm thinking right now. I'm living a rather hermit sort of lifestyle, but I'm taking steps to get more social, get more traveling, get more moving around. I'm going to be working with people in spaces and in areas where in fields that have similar interests. So I think once I start doing that, I'll be more active and start actually meeting more people, and there might be a chance to actually do that. But even if it's not that, when I'm doing those things, even if I go to a matchmaker or if I go to a dating site or I go to these things, I'll have something for that person who I potentially meet to base some more of my personality and potential future off of once I'm doing those things more active. So I have that in mind. But yeah, it's just something. This was a matchmaking chapter. This was $3,500 for love. The matchmaker, that was that chapter. And I don't know, got anything else to say on the chapter?
Not much really. I mean, these next few chapters are really interesting. This guy Evan gives her sort of supplements some of the stuff we're talking about here about, like, okay, what are you looking for? Are your standards too high? Things like that. Yeah, sure.
Good.
Okay.
So yeah, looking forward to that. And as usual, Stephen, thank you very much. There'll be links below to other content that we have, a lot of other series. If you enjoyed this, definitely check out the one where we had the talking about the article. Definitely check out the other parts in this series. There's other books and things that we're talking about. You can also find Stephen on Instagram. He doesn't use Twitter as much. He's a minor internet celebrity on Facebook, so maybe you can add him on that. and we'll have more content coming on here. I'm working on a few different projects. We're working on a few projects together in the back that we're going to eventually announce and talk about that as those things go. Stephen, as you mentioned, is in relationships. Maybe Christine will be able to come on later on and we can talk maybe more like personal type of things. Like, and that was, you'll get to meet her soon, maybe eventually. But yeah, that's it for now.
Yep.
Stephen, you can stay on a bit after, but guys, gals, and everybody else in between, Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.